When I was a freshman in college, I found myself on a quest in the campus library. Though I'd only read a handful of books in my life at the time, I kept encountering the name Chesterton in the C.S. Lewis course that I was taking, and I wanted to know who on earth this Chesterton fellow was. And I began my search by going to the library computer to look up where I could find him. I remember some innocent vandal had scribbled on the mousepad next to the computer, "I heart knowledge," but they had misspelled knowledge. The computer proved more reliable, however, and told me that Chesterton could be found on the back shelf of the library. So I went to the back shelf, found his section, and grabbed a random book. I plopped down on the ground so I could begin flipping through the pages. The book that I had grabbed was a collection of essays called All Things Considered, and in it I stumbled across an essay called On Running After One's Hat. He begins this essay by talking about how London had recently been flooded, but his attitude towards this flooding is a bit different than you might expect. He says, "I feel an almost savage envy on hearing that London has been flooded in my absence while I am in the mere country. My own Battersea has been, I understand, particularly favored as a meeting of the waters. Battersea was already, as I need hardly say, the most beautiful of human localities. Now that it has the additional splendor of great sheets of water, there must be something quite incomparable in the landscape, or waterscape, of my own romantic town. Battersea must be a vision of Venice. The greengrocer who brought the cabbages to the corner of Latchmere Road must have leant upon the oar with the unearthly grace of a gondolier. Some consider such romantic views of flood or fire slightly lacking in reality, but really this romantic view of such inconveniences is quite as practical as the other. He says that most of the inconveniences that make men swear or women cry are really sentimental or imaginative inconveniences, things altogether of the mind. Everything depends upon the emotional point of view. You can safely apply the test to almost every one of the things that are currently talked of as the typical nuisance of daily life. And here is where we get the chasing of hats. For instance, there is a current impression that it is unpleasant to have to run after one's hat. Why should it be unpleasant to the well-ordered and pious mind? Not merely because it is running, and running exhausts one. The same people run much faster in games and sports. The same people run much more eagerly after an uninteresting little leather ball than they will after a nice silk hat. There is an idea that it is humiliating to run after one's hat, and when people say it is humiliating, they mean that it is comic. It certainly is comic, but man is a very comic creature, and most of the things he does are comic. Eating, for instance. And the most comic things of all are exactly the things that are most worth doing, such as making love. A man running after a hat is not half so ridiculous as a man running after a wife. Now a man could, if he felt rightly in the matter, run after his hat with the manliest ardor and the most sacred joy. He might regard himself as a jolly huntsman pursuing a wild animal, for certainly no animal could be wilder. In fact, I am inclined to believe that hat hunting on windy days will be the sport of the upper classes in the future. There will be a meet of ladies and gentlemen on some high ground on a gusty morning. They will be told that the professional attendants have started a hat in such and such a thicket, or whatever be the technical term. Notice that this employment will in the fullest degree combine sport with humanitarianism. The hunters would feel that they were not inflicting pain, nay, they would feel they were inflicting pleasure, rich, almost riotous pleasure upon the people who were looking on. When I last saw an old gentleman running after his hat in Hyde Park, I told him that a heart so benevolent as his ought to be filled with peace and thanks at the thought of how much unaffected pleasure his every gesture and bodily attitude were at that moment giving to the crowd. The same principle can be applied to every other typical domestic worry. A gentleman trying to get a fly out of the milk or a piece of cork from the glass of wine often imagines himself to be irritated. Let him think for a moment of the patience of the anglers sitting by dark pools, and let his soul be immediately irradiated with gratification and repose. So if this quirkily romantic and yet right-minded beginning of the essay weren't enough to make me fall in love with him, Towards the end, he says, "An adventure is only an inconvenience rightly considered. An inconvenience is only an adventure wrongly considered." So sitting on the floor of the library a decade ago, I was stricken with the joy and health of Chesterton's mindset. And I have been chasing that mindset through all of his books ever since, like the old man was chasing his hat in Hyde Park. But to my surprise, this year I found that the hat that was blowing in the winds of this essay blew into another of his works, one called Manalive. This novel begins with a few young men and women standing in a garden outside the house where they board. They're in the garden, though it's overcast and blustery, because they want to escape the cheerless interior of the house that is made that way by their conventional lifestyle. They watch things blow around in the wind, and they end up seeing a hat blow over the wall and into their garden. But to their surprise, that hat is being pursued by a rather strange individual. Chesterton says, "A fresh eruption of the atmosphere had indeed almost thrown them off their balance and broken the blackened trees in the garden. Beyond, all sorts of accidental objects could be seen scouring the wind-scoured sky. Straws, sticks, rags, papers, and in the distance, a disappearing hat. Its disappearance, however, was not final. After an interval of minutes, they saw it again, much larger and closer, a white Panama, towering up into the heavens like a balloon, staggering to and fro for an instant like a stricken kite, and then settling in the center of their own lawn as falteringly as a fallen leaf." "Somebody's lost a good hat," said Dr. Warner shortly. Almost as he spoke, another object came over the garden wall, flying after the fluttering Panama. It was a big green umbrella. After that came hurtling a huge yellow Gladstone bag. And after that came a figure like a flying wheel of legs, as in the Shield of the Isle of Man. So someone's thrown an umbrella and a bag over the wall and then lunged over the wall himself. And it's this huge man who starts instantly chasing after his hat. To be courteous, one of the people sitting in the garden makes to help him catch the hat, but is quickly stopped. "Unsportsmanlike," bellowed the big man. "Give it fair play, give it fair play." And he came after his own hat quickly, but cautiously with burning eyes. The eccentric went bounding after it with kangaroo leaps and bursts of breathless speech, of which it was not always easy to pick up the thread. Fair play, sport of kings, chase their crowns, quite humane." He dives after his hat, missing it utterly and landing on his face. But to the surprise of the people in the garden, he kicks his legs up and ends up snatching it with his feet. Just when the mysterious man has captured his own hat, the hat of Dr. Warner blows off and is caught in the top of a nearby tree. Before the boarders know what's happening, the mysterious man is already halfway up the tree, swinging himself from fork to fork with his strong, bent grasshopper legs, and still giving forth his gasping, mysterious comments. "Tree of life, Yggdrasil, climbed for centuries perhaps. Man in the moon wears it. Brigand, not yours. Belongs to depressed medical man and garden. Give it up! Give it up!" So the mysterious man ends up saving the doctor's hat, but to the doctor's dismay, it's a little tattered. After he gives it back and things have calmed down a little bit, one of the other members in the garden thinks that he might recognize this mysterious man. He thinks it might be one of his old schoolfellows, but the last he heard, that man had gone to an asylum for being insane. He gets up the nerve to mention it to the mysterious man and says, "Why, I believe you're Smith, and yet I'm not sure." "I have a card, I think," said the unknown with baffling solemnity. "A card with my real name, my titles, offices, and true purpose on this earth." He draws out a big card of a strange shape and begins to hand it to the man named Arthur. But it was there only for an instant, for as it passed from his fingers to Arthur's, one or the other slipped his hold. The strident, tearing gale in that garden carried away the stranger's card to join the wild wastepaper of the universe. Whether this man is actually the insane old schoolfellow, and what effect he has on these boarders, I'll leave you to find out for yourself. And bear in mind there is a lovely Audible edition of this book as well. But whatever you do, don't look up the plot of this book before you read it. It would spoil a lot of fun. This is one of my favorite books by Chesterton, and I'm sure I'll do another more in-depth video of it in the future. So, until then, see ya.
couch.